Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1917 Diary Series. It is the 5th of January 2026 and we're getting a little personal today. We're going to the penultimate section of the long diary entry of the 7th of November 1917. So our recap, the last video was about the Italian catastrophe on the Western Front and more about the Persian famine. And Dmitri had a number of 20 to 30 people dying in Tehran every day, so pretty appalling. And he himself seeing what's the word? Well, seeing people illicitly, policemen illicitly selling bread, and seeing angry people in fights over bread on the street. Okay, as I said, today's content is entirely personal rather than historical in the sense of referencing historical events. So here we go. I should also say that there's quite a lot of English and a little French, so I'll try to remember to let you know where that is. And as always, if the English sounds a little off, then I'll throw Dmitri under the bus and say that's because of him, not because of me. All right, here we go. As for my personal affairs, I have regularized my relations with Lady Marling. Recently, our rapport were terribly strained because I could not support that amitié amoureuse that had been established between us in recent times, and that for two reasons. First of all, I got terribly self-conscious. When I went out with Lady Marling à deux, I had the feeling that everybody is laughing at me in saying, voilà la amoureuse avec son amant. And it was so stupid because she's so much older than me. And when we went somewhere à trois, then everyone was laughing at old Marling. Overall, it was terribly painful, and I felt that I was a horrible cad. The last 2 weeks we hardly spoke, or if we did have a conversation, it was in a cold and formal tone. Finally, in the morning, Lady Marling herself began to speak about the change in my attitude that she had seen in recent times. Cela devait venir. And then I told her everything. I said that she has all my most devoted friendship, but that I could not return to the past. And of course, I also explained the reasons. For example, my relationship with her husband. And then, if only our names are joined in Tehran, that will fall upon her and her reputation. And Lady Marling very readily saw that. The conversation was quite painful. She cried and seemed terribly unhappy, but afterwards things became much better. A boulder immediately rolled off my shoulders, exclamation point. This conversation was all the more timely because old Marling had left for a 3-day hunt, and we had the opportunity to remain à deux. So it would have been simply intolerable if we had had such strained relations. All right, very interesting. But if you think this is the last such confrontation or the last such strain in a relationship, you are mistaken. I can assure you it will even carry over into London in 1920. Okay, so let's have a look. First, one of the first things that just jumps off the page for me with this, and that is confirmed in the other diary entries and letters, is that Dmitri was not a romantic person. He was neither a romantic person nor a passionate person when it came to romantic things. He liked sex. He would make use of prostitutes, but he was not, he was not romantic. And so I think there was this misunderstanding between him and women like Lady Marling, that he had these kind of, we can neck a little, we can have a little hanky-panky, a little fun, but for them it was something more serious than for him. At least in the case of Lady Marling, it was more like, well, you know, were in love with each other, and yeah, he was more of a friends with benefits kind of guy, although in this instance the benefits weren't, you know, intercourse. They seem to have been sort of everything up to that point. Yeah, so, you know, the whole thing about him being such a playboy, you know, he liked to have, he flirted with everyone. He liked to have this kind of reputation, I think. I'm stumbling around here, but it was the same with Coco. You know, those of you who listened to the videos about his so-called romance with Coco Chanel, and it was, again, it was very, I'm not really into her, she's not that attractive, but she's a great friend. Yeah, that sort of thing, more than a passionate romance. And, you know, it's funny because he kind of peaked early in the whole passionate romance side of things, because that was Missy for him. That was the Queen of Romania, Maria of Romania. She was the one that in his diaries and in his letters he is speaking about passionately and romantically, even as late again as 1919, 1920, even though all that came to a disastrous head in 1908. And one other person, I may have mentioned her before, this woman named Giselle Marling, and he just fell for her. When she was staying at the Ritz in London, he was staying at the Ritz in London, and he was actually even kind of stalking her a little. And before he even knew her name, talking in his diary about how this woman attracted him. And again, it might not have been romantic, but it's definitely more emotional language than what he usually uses. And they remained very good friends right up till the end of his life. You know, and Vera Caroli would be another one. In her reminiscences, she talked about Dmitri and herself being madly in love with each other. And, you know, Dmitri was quick to sort of try and pop that bubble when he was in Tehran, and she was talking about coming and joining him there. So what did he want from women in these situations? He, you know, he needed the emotional stability and the warmth and the kind of maternal element. He really needed that. He really wanted that. And then this, you know, because he approached other people trying to endear himself to them, going back to his childhood and the turmoil and the moving from household to household. And so I think he was pretty effective at sort of coming across as someone who, yeah, who cared for them deeply and so on, even if not using those words, because I'm quite certain he wasn't being manipulative in the sense of saying, oh, yes, I love you. But it was seemingly very often misunderstood. And the interesting thing about this is that he doesn't seem to understand why they're misunderstanding him. But, you know, this wording, I have regularized my relations, is about as pragmatic and unromantic as you can get. Okay, so where to go from there? Well, some of the French. So rapport, of course, is in French. It's misspelled. Amitié amoureuse, if I understand it correctly, and I have, you know, both looked it up and talked to French friends about it, is, you know, not friends with benefits, usually. It's more a sort of flirtatious friendship, maybe. So the kind of thing that Dmitri did indeed have with Lady Marling. Then he writes in English, first of all, I got terribly self-conscious, on and on. So this brings up another really interesting thing. You know, when you read enough of a person's writing, you kind of begin to be able to read between the lines. And in Dmitri's case, very often it's not reading between the lines, it's overt. And one of the things that comes up over and over and over again is this idea of being looked at. Maybe that just comes naturally with being royal. He's always thinking of things from that perspective. How are people looking at me? And not only how are they looking at me, but how are they looking at other people with whom I'm connected? And, you know, you could maybe, I've never been royalty or in close proximity with royalty from currently ruling isn't really the word, but you know what I mean. Anyway, it seems like the ego part of it would be that you would always assume that people are looking at you from the perspective of, wow, this person is automatically good and beautiful or handsome, even if they're really not. But in Dmitri's case, it always makes him uncomfortable because he always assumes that there's an element of judgment there, and he's always really afraid, above all else, of looking ridiculous, looking silly. And that was the sort of fundamental anxiety he had, not only with the public, but with his own relatives, that they looked at him and saw someone who was kind of, you know, hopelessly muddle-headed and not someone to be taken seriously. So here he's worried about how he's being seen, and it's funny that he one of the things that embarrasses him is that Lady Marling is 9 years older than him, which is not that old. I mean, she's in her mid-30s, and maybe she looked younger. We don't know. Of course, it's also possible she looked older. But for the guy who was head over heels in love with Missy of Romania, who I believe was old enough to be his mother, and he actually kind of preferred older women, and other women that he was, including Coco, that he was connected to were older than him. But with Lady Marling, it really bothered him for some reason. That was kind of what embarrassed him. Then he's worried about Sir Charles being looked at as someone ridiculous, which I would think, yes, that must have been to some extent the case. And then he's worried about Lady Marling being looked at as sort of a woman of, kind of a fallen woman. That he's quite right when he says this is going to affect her reputation. It's going to fall upon her, and of course it would have. They would be quite willing to look at him as a young 26-year-old bachelor with, a shrug of the shoulders, but they weren't going to look at her that way, a married woman, a highly respectable husband in a public role. It all makes me think of Anna Karenina, which I recently reread. Although Dmitri was not a Vronsky, he wasn't. He was not, as we were just discussing, going to urge Lady Marling to leave her husband and go running off with him. I wonder if she would have wanted him to. Okay, and he's also always willing to blame himself where the blame is actually apt. I'm not saying he shouldn't. So you always have those elements in anything he writes that involves some kind of conflict of him being able to look at himself realistically, although he may not really understand where the other person is coming from. Okay, another thing you have that's very characteristic is his avoidance of confrontation. So he let this go on for a couple of weeks where they really weren't speaking to each other, aside from really low-level practical things. No, I can't go on a walk today because I'm having lunch with so-and-so. Sorry, I just threw something there to distract my little dog. Not at him, near him. And it worked. Okay, so she ends up initiating the conversation. And he said in an earlier diary entry, this conversation has to come. It just has to come. I know it's coming. And here in French, cela devait venir. It had to come. But he was not going to be the one who initiated it. He just did not like confrontation. And so it was her. She was the one who had to bring the subject up. And then, they worked it out for the time being. And he felt greatly relieved, and she sort of cried it out, and now they're friends again. Okay, so good. It does surprise me when he says that Marling had left them alone, had gone off on this 3-day hunt, And I would think more in terms of the public perception of that. Maybe it was good. Maybe he was thinking, oh, if I go off on a 3-day hunt, then everybody will see I'm not worried about this situation. I don't know. And maybe he thought, well, they're not going to, they're not going to escalate this situation. I'm trying to think how amite amarus would be put in English. They're not, they're barely speaking to each other, so it's not like they're going to resume their flirtation. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. That's about it. So what do we have next time? Next time we have strange news, strange goings on from Kazvin that Dmitri can't quite figure out. And that is where the Russian troops in Persia are headquartered. The active duty Russian army troops, that is, not the Cossacks or anything like that. Yeah, and so and some really inaccurate news had been channeled through Kazvin about, oh, everything's fine in Russia, the Bolsheviks have been put down. So it's an interesting topic, that trying to sort of get to the bottom of what's going on in Kazvin. So do come back for that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.